Thank you for joining me here today. It's a good morning. It's Saturday, September 28th. So if you don't know who I am, my name is Roel Dionisio, and I talk about mainly about Wi-Fi, but I do other networking things as well. So in this stream this morning, we're going to talk about some IEEE stuff with the 802.11 standard that's coming out. We've got some cybersecurity awareness coming up in October, some CUPS vulnerabilities that recently was disclosed, and is it a big deal or not? I see a lot of people talking about it. We're going to go through some UniFi switch release notes, talk about what is enterprise grade, because I had mentioned about this last week and posted it on LinkedIn and some other platforms, and there was some good feedback from other people what they thought was enterprise grade. Then I'll go into some network engineering skill sets, talking about Wi-Fi for 1 million people, and is it a Wi-Fi issue or not? And I think it's again, my name is Roel. I think it's a good day to talk about a lot of things that have happened over the course of the week. You get into this busy mode and kind of get some time to reflect and also get to talk with people like you on what's happening out there in the industry. And where I came from was I started off as like a help desk technician, made my way up to a sysadmin, became an IT manager and network engineer, and today I'm a Wi-Fi architect. And so I also manage my own consulting business on the side, where we have I have one employee who also does some of the technical work, and I come across a lot of different things, and so I thought I'd spend some time talking about it on the live stream. So good morning to you folks. Hopefully you guys are having a good morning as well. One of the first things that I do want to talk about is that the IEEE now has the 802.11 2024 wireless standard out there. You can actually purchase this for $676 US dollars. You'll get the PDF. Or if you have the access to IEEE Explorer, you'll be able to download it. So I have an EDU account, and I was able to download this. I took a quick glance at it. I haven't fully read it. There's a lot of pages. Makes excellent reading material for the evening. But when I started looking at it, I noticed a few things on for one, the purchase page. It said it was still in the draft form, so it's not the fully released version, the updated version, where it has all the amendments rolled up into this specific standard here. And you can even see on the top in the screenshot, it does say /D 7.0. So this is still draft 7.0 as of August 2024. And when I was going into this document, I specifically wanted to see what they were adding. And there's a list of things that they're adding that have been different standards have came out that relate to Wi-Fi. And so they'll roll this up into a standard, right? This would supersede the 2020 version. And from 2020, they're rolling in these protocols. And in looking through it, I could not find 802.11be. And maybe they're waiting for that to fully complete. I don't know. And maybe they'll update this draft in order to have it fully out. I don't see why they would publish it and say this is final without including anything about Wi-Fi 7. But it's just something to keep note of. And if you've got institutional access, I think you should go to IEEE Explorer. You can find your institution, be able to log in that way, and you'll be able to download actually a lot of different IEEE docs. And this is how I've been able to learn about how Wi-Fi works, how we've been able to publish videos for the Clear to Send podcast as me and Francois go through these standards documents. They're not the easiest to go through, to be honest. They're quite challenging to read, and it just takes time to fully understand. And that's why having the community out here and talking about what's in the standard, being able to dissect and understand what it actually means, is good to know, because this is what a lot of the manufacturers are using. And so it's their way of interpreting what's in the standard and how they push that out into their devices. And with the standard, you'll be able to understand how and why a device works, maybe, right? So that's the IEEE 802.11 2024 version, hopefully to be released fully updated with Wi-Fi 7. And maybe I just didn't see it. I haven't fully read the whole document. There's a lot, there's several pages to go through, which I think is kind of insane to try to read all of it. And maybe that's why a lot of the vendors come up with these bugs of how that doesn't work, right? It's just a way of interpreting it and then applying it into your device. And we'll kind of talk about that later when I talk about, is it a Wi-Fi issue or not? Now, coming in October, right? We're right around the end of September. And it's kind of crazy to think we're almost at the end of the year here, but it is National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Again, that's in October. It was actually, I think, designated by President Bush back in 2004. And it actually helps to bring awareness on the importance of cybersecurity. And I smile because cybersecurity is still an issue in this industry, right? And in a lot of different companies, cybersecurity is not that important, or it is very hard to implement. And so I just wanted to give you some simple ways to have you more aware with cybersecurity. So some ways to stay safe online is the most obvious one, which isn't done by a lot of people, is to patch your systems. And I'm not talking about just your operating systems, talking about your servers, Linux servers, your routers, your switches, your APs, everything. They should be patched. Now, I know when you work with a cybersecurity team or information security team, they'll want you to patch right away, right? And we'll talk about the CUPS vulnerability, because they'll come out and say, hey, how are you safeguarding our network because of this vulnerability? You should be patching up to this specific version. And if you're a network engineer or even a sysadmin, you know that it sometimes is not as simple as just upgrading to that version to fix that vulnerability. And additionally, when you upgrade to a specific version, it can also introduce other bugs, right? And so it's just something that keep in mind when you try to patch these systems, is look at the release notes as well. The other thing to stay safe online is to use lengthy, strong passwords. And the easiest way I've been able to do that is to use a password manager. And this password manager I have installed on all my computers, on my mobile devices, and it's just easy to just log into there and have to copy those passwords, right? So you can put a length of 15 characters or stronger, as long as the application can support it. And if it doesn't, then that's something to be really concerned about. But using a password manager, and I think you can use any password manager as long as it's not one you write down into a notebook. But there's 1Password, there's LastPass, Dashlane, a whole slew of them. And last week I talked about Ubiquiti's Verify application as well, where you can put your passwords there. So I think that's something that should be done pretty easily. And then on top of that password, you should be using multi-factor authentication, or you could use passkey. And so with 1Password, there's a passkey feature, and you can just log on with that. And I think that's something that everyone should be using nowadays. Everyone's still using insecure passwords, and I think insecure passwords are really just great for like lab environments where you need to set something up, test it, and you want to just use a simple password. But again, if you're using a password manager, it should be as easy as copying it or having it automatically log in for you. And so those would be the 3 ways I think you could stay safe online and help share that with other people. Because at home in the consumer world, right, they're not patching anything, right? When was the last time a refrigerator that was on Wi-Fi patched, or their wireless router, when was that patched? And where the industry would have to improve is maybe implementing some sort of auto patching mechanism, do the auto upgrades, so that way a user who's not technical has to log in and upgrade those devices. So I think, with Cybersecurity Awareness Month, it's also a good time to take inventory of all your systems and be sure to patch them. Also change the passwords. You want to change your password often. And so as network engineers who have access to a lot of important systems, you must have strong passwords policies and also multi-factor authentication. It's just going to be the most secure way to manage our devices. And then we stay clear of the cybersecurity team who's trying to implement all these, go and bother people about being secure. We can be secure ourselves. And I'm curious if at your organization, do they put a focus on Cybersecurity Awareness Month? Are they doing sessions with everyone where they talk about how you can improve security for your organization, what those processes look like as well? Because there are many orgs who manage computers themselves, right? You got an MDM, and being able to push patches that way, or being able to ensure that a device is not compromised in some way. And so maybe they're using something like CrowdStrike. I don't know. And of course, CrowdStrike had their issues not too long ago, but curious how you would approach Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Do you even know about it? I probably have forgotten about it. Don't really pay attention to these specialized themed months, to be honest. But the key focus would be thinking about security up front and not putting it in the back burner and thinking about it after the fact. You want to try to implement security as you're deploying a device or deploying a system. All right. So speaking of security, there was a recent disclosure on cups, which is just as I understand, a print server functionality for Linux systems. And there are 4 CVEs that came out, right? And so I'll put that up here. And from my understanding is this cups vulnerability is really affecting print servers that are using Linux. The first vulnerability is CVE 2024-47076. And it is a flaw within the libcups filters where IPP packets are not validated or they're not sanitized. And so the potential to send malicious data to the system is pretty high. And I would probably say that a malicious actor would need to have access to this print server. So if you got a print server that's sitting out there on the internet, you probably want to get this patched, or you probably want to mitigate the scope of who has access to this print server, or just take it offline entirely. Just put that thing on your network. The second CVE 2024-47175, it affects the libppd library with a problem on the input validation. So the IPP data, again, is not validated or sanitized, so it is possible to inject malicious data into the PPD file. The third CVE 2024-47176 is a bug affecting the cups browse library to allow any packets from any source on IPP UDP port 631. And this is where a lot of the folks are kind of focusing, is looking at, okay, UDP port 631, this is what I'm going to block on my firewall. But I think it's important to understand what how you would be affected with your Linux systems on the network. Would you just block that port entirely, and will that affect people in their printing? So I think you just have to limit the scope of who has access to that print server. And so the final CVE 2024-47177, it affects the cups filters library and allows an attacker to execute commands on the server. So this one is, I think, pretty bad because of being able to do remote execution and basically going to gain access to that server. And so how bad is it really, all four of these CVEs? From my perspective, I would just need to know, okay, how many print servers do I have on the network? And I think that's where a lot of people might have some challenges, is understanding how many you actually have. So you may have to do a scan on a network and see what is listening on UDP port 631. Do you have any firewall filters you can apply, some policies to limit the scope? Are you able to patch the systems? So I would check with whoever, Linux flavor you've got. I know Red Hat has already put something out there, and these vulnerabilities that the CVEs that I got here, I got this from Rapid7, and so they talk about how to address it, how to handle it as well. And now the vulnerabilities were disclosed, but the public disclosure, I think the person who found this gave them a few weeks, and then now it's just kind of out there. So just something to keep in mind. I know there's always a lot of vulnerabilities. This one just kind of made its cycles all over the place on social media and made it seem like it's the most insecure thing. But if you're not running a print server, and actually if you're running a Linux server that's just online, you may want to just ensure that if you don't need the print server functionality, just turn that thing off. Remove the ability of the service for that to run, and that would help limit your exposure to the vulnerability, and also make sure you have firewall rules that only allow specific applications that are being used against your Linux server to hit that server as well. All right, so that's cups. And every week I try to look at release notes to see what kind of updates are coming out, and I try to stay on top of them. I use a lot of different vendors' equipment, so it's kind of hard to stay up to date as much as possible. I try to get notifications for when some of these are released, and some vendors, they don't have the option of sending an email alert or any kind of notification, but Ubiquiti does. And so I have a few clients who use UniFi, and so here with UniFi switching, they have released 7.1.26, and the Enterprise 8 PoE switch, they actually fixed an issue where loop protection didn't work since 7.1.23. So hopefully you didn't have a loop between 7.1.23 and 7.1.26. Maybe you had an issue, you didn't know why it was happening. Well, maybe loop protection wasn't working. They also fixed an issue where IGMP snooping, the auto query address, it didn't work properly, and so they fixed that with the 7.1.26 release. So again, it's just me taking time to look at release notes, because I try to stay on top of issues, especially when working with other devices, other networks, trying to figure out why we're having a specific problem. And I try to match that with maybe a potential bug, especially when I rule out a lot of different things. I rule out the network, rule out the Wi-Fi. I want to know if there is some sort of issue with firmware or the OS in general. So I think kind of cruising through those release notes every once in a while is a good thing. But for me, since I have multi-vendor environments, it's a little bit more difficult to stay on top of it, right? And especially some of these vendors, they have a long list of resolved issues, because I was looking at Aruba Networks, their controller not too long ago. And man, going through each of those versions and looking at the resolved issues list, it's quite large. So do want to give credit to Aruba for fixing all of those issues. But it did take me a while to kind of look and see, okay, what is the issue that I'm seeing currently on this network somehow addressed by a bug fix? And so that's just kind of the nature of it right now. And I am always looking to see if there's a bug because nowadays it does seem like a bug, right? With the whole interoperability with devices over Wi-Fi and APs and controllers, there's just a whole bunch of bugs. And so it kind of dovetails into a conversation that I had last week on the live stream talking about whether Ubiquity is enterprise grade. And so I kind of put that out there on social media saying what, in addition to just saying, is Ubiquity enterprise grade? Are they enterprise ready? Are they there yet? I did ask, is what makes a vendor enterprise to begin with? So I did have a few responses stemming from that last week's live stream. And so I just want you to think about what you would consider as enterprise. And if you can put that as a comment or in the chat, I would be interested, because is it something like having support, maybe TAC-like support, a phone number to call, email, do forums count? Do they need some sort of SLA? And what would that SLA be about? Is it just a support SLA? Would it be having a robust supply chain? Maybe having to support MFA on those devices? What else would we consider as enterprise grade? So I had a few comments. This one here from, I think this was on TikTok. And so specifically talking about a vendor, and they said, here's what I would think would make a vendor enterprise. So support, SLA, on-call, engineering, dedicated account managers, a full supply chain, better firewall policy management, full BGP, advanced switch config. And some, some of these I agree with. Support should be there. Support is a given. You need support on your products, especially when you have a network device that supports some critical applications and you're having an issue. You do want to have support on. And on the topic of engineering, I think this is where some companies lack the amount of skillful engineers. You go through a tiered support, right? Tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. And a lot of times when we first reach tier 1, they're not exactly as great as we would hope. And so you try to escalate it, and this is based on my experience. But once in a while, you get a good engineer, right? Someone who could take the information you've provided, maybe the PCAPs and all the logs, and be able to look through that and understand, all right, here's where the issue lies. Having dedicated account managers. Now, I'm not sure if that would make a vendor enterprise just because they got account managers. I typically don't interface as much with account managers from every vendor. It just depends on how involved that account manager would be. And also it depends on how large your organization is. If you're just a small business, you probably won't get a dedicated account manager. You'll probably have an account manager that manages multiple accounts across the board, maybe accounts of all on the West Coast, right? And so a dedicated account manager is typically given to really big organizations where that person maybe just has you as your account, or maybe two others that are similar to your organization. And so dedicated account managers, maybe not. So I've ran into a few who are just, they don't really help as much, and they're just there to sell you things. Supply chain. I haven't really thought about supply chain as often, and really that how much that matters. But when talking about supply chain from last week's live stream and how a supply chain can be infiltrated and then compromised by malicious actors doing something to equipment, either placing some device in the hardware, that kind of thing. I think having a secure supply chain and fully understanding what's happening in your supply chain is important. But as end users, we don't typically think about supply chain. When it comes to firewall policy management, I think that's a big one. I've seen firewall vendors where they say this is a firewall, but I cannot see things like what traffic is coming in and out of the network. How many hits do I have on the policy that I configured? What is actually hitting that policy? If I can't see those kinds of details, that's not really an enterprise firewall. To me, that's that's just a box with ACLs, and you just trust that the ACLs work, but you don't know if they do or do not. And so, yeah, I would say a better firewall management. I fully agree with you there. Full BGP is a nice to have. Not everyone has full BGP support on their devices, and I think this is where the cost considerably jumps, right? BGP takes on a lot of resources on the device, unless you're just going to take the default route. And when you need a device with hefty resources, it just costs more, right? And then everything kind of trickles behind that, because when we talk about certain vendors who are very cost effective and those who are very expensive, then it just depends on what kind of features you're going to have implemented on these network devices, what kind of engineers you will need to understand those features on those network devices and troubleshoot, and then have the support behind it as well. And so, yeah, full BGP just opens up, like, all these advanced configuration. It just opens up a whole other conversation when we talk about the price of each vendor. I think that's just one part of it. And then advanced switch config, we're all used to doing CLI as a network engineer, and more, many of these vendors are moving towards having a user interface to configure the switch, but not have any kind of CLI access to do some sort of advanced configuration, advanced troubleshooting, the like. And so that's where I think a lot of the problems can come up, and maybe make a vendor enterprise or not enterprise. And I think we're right now talking mostly technical, and I don't think an IT decision maker would say CLI access would make it enterprise grade, unless unless that decision maker fully has the trust of their engineering team. Then they would say, hey, we need this kind of feature set there. I had another comment where this was in regards to Ubiquiti not being enterprise grade, maybe small office, home office, or small medium business at best. But having a support contract in place, where you purchase hardware and you have a support agreement where 8x5, 24/7, what's the SLA response to a ticket based on the issue, the hardware quality. And so some vendors have very hardened equipment. At Cisco Live, I've seen APs just thrown around and they still work like normal. Can you do that with other APs? Just kind of shows how much a vendor puts into the quality of their hardware, both internally and externally of that component. And then the quality of software functionality. When it comes to software functionality, I'm not sure what would make it enterprise, because when you work with any vendor, they're going to have bugs, and some bugs are okay. They're not as impactful on your network, but then some bugs are highly impactful. And then now you're on an attack call for hours on end. And so would a situation like that make a company enterprise grade or enterprise ready? I think maybe having the support, yeah, but there are challenging issues. And you just have to remember that we have humans programming these devices, so bugs are going to exist. They're just going to be there. And so software quality, I think as long as a software is not continuously buggy and doesn't have constant instability, then yeah, we've got something that's enterprise ready. But if your software can't stay up, you've got devices rebooting every hour, every minute, radios resetting every second, then yeah, we've got an issue there. The comment in regards to Fortinet, I think Fortinet is enterprise. They've got a pretty robust supply chain. They've got really good support contracts. They have really good engineers there. And I think I would just have to go into that comment a little bit more. But when you compare Fortinet to Ubiquiti, I don't think that's a apples to apples comparison. They're very different, and they are very different in price. But I think if you consider the amount of flexibility you have in your equipment that you get with Fortinet, and compare certain features to UniFi, there are things that are not similar. Let's see some other comments. Alan agreed on kind of my comments about ubiquity, but he's also adding supply chain and another comment about supply chain. Now, I'm curious what you guys are really thinking about when it comes to supply chain. Is it the availability of equipment too? Like how quickly they can manufacture this equipment and get it out there? The purchasing process, I think that's a good one. And a lot of these vendors have channel partners, and I think that's where potentially issues arise, right? As a partner myself, having to deal with purchasing with a client, partners have to purchase the equipment from distributors. And so this is where maybe Ubiquity kind of shines, is that a lot of the customers can just buy directly from Ubiquity. But if you wanted to buy Cisco, unless you're like a Fortune 10, you're not buying directly from Cisco. You're going to go through a channel partner. And so if a purchasing problem occurs, it's probably likely somewhere between the partner and the distributor. That's just what I think. Long-term hardware replacement stock, logistics. Yes, the logistics is a big one, especially as a vendor grows. Can they meet the demand and have logistics work efficiently where you're shipping things out across the world, right? And then being able to stay on top of the regulations in those different regions. I think that's also important. And then the other comment, I put this one in here because Marcus, if I remember correctly, works for Ubiquity. And he's in the security side of things. And so he put in Ubiquity's cybersecurity efforts. Goes perfectly with Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Wonder if he planned that. But he's highlighting some of the security assets that Ubiquity has, right? MFA to access your accounts, the MFA methods that are available. It's not just a text for here's your 6-digit code, put this in. You've got different ways of MFA, different methods, the minimum password length required and the complexity, and then bug bounty program. I don't think anyone has mentioned bug bounty programs within the comments, and also the security disclosures that they have, and we can get notifications. And so I think Ubiquity is making good steps, and you could say, hey, they're not enterprise, or you can say they are. Just depends what your requirements are for your network. They may be able to meet it. But I did read some of the comments that Marcus got on this post, and as a public person of a company, you will get some negative comments, and there were some negative ones out there. And I think hopefully, Marcus, you're doing okay with those negative comments. People will find a way to put in their 2 cents. But that's with every vendor. It's not just Ubiquity. So those are kind of enterprise features, enterprise ready. I'd be interested to know what you guys think of what would qualify for enterprise. You can leave that in the comments. You can leave it in the chat. But I'll move on to another topic. I wanted to talk about network engineering skill sets, because lately I've been coming across different kinds of network engineers and what I think would be a decent background for a network engineer. And I do see a lot of people on X talking about becoming or making that shift, that transition to network engineering. And so with my background, just kind of a quick background of me and how I got there. So I started out in help desk, made my way through managing Windows servers. I had a stint as an IT manager, but I did manage a pretty distributed Cisco environment. And then I became a network engineer. And then I was a network engineer for maybe, 8-9 years, became a lead, and now I'm a Wi-Fi architect. So I was doing a lot of layer 2, very little layer 3 stuff, just because of the organization that was big. But in the IT consulting role that I have, I do touch pretty much the whole stack of networking, from routing to SD-WAN stuff, Wi-Fi, firewalls, you name it. And so some of the things that I see to have this skill set as a network engineer, and these are the I think are simple but do require time, and also a lot of thought. And so for me, the ability to learn is a big one, because if you were watching the rest of this prior to this point and talking about how I was talking about release notes, being able to learn and find certain things is going to be key, especially if you're on a very lean team, or maybe you're the only network engineer. You don't have anyone to rely on, and maybe your account manager is not as good, and maybe support is not helping you as much. You need to be able to learn things and have a good fundamental networking background. So while you're studying for your CCNA or whatever certification you're going for, you need to ask good questions. And by good questions, it's not as questions such as like, hey, I couldn't get this IP to ping, respond to my ping requests. What's wrong? You need to figure it out. So that's the second thing a network engineer should have in their skill set, is being able to figure things out. And so you got to be able to dig, right? So when you ask good questions, you're going to ask a question that in some way or form you're asking someone like, hey, here's what I've done and what I know and how I know this should work, but I'm not able to get the proper result. Could you help me in the right direction? And so something like that, rather than just going to someone and saying, hey, this isn't working, can you fix it? Because I can't. So ability to learn, being able to do just-in-time learning, that's a big thing, because you may run into a protocol that you need to troubleshoot and you need to brush up on it, or maybe you don't know about it. Being able to go and look at the standards, for example, and being able to look and see how that protocol is supposed to work, and then figuring it out. So being able to know where to look, where that issue comes in. And so the third piece for me is troubleshooting, because if you're going to go get your CCNA, you got a good networking background. Those certifications are great for greenfield environments, because the scenarios in there aren't quite what you see when you step out into the real world. And so this is where troubleshooting becomes such a good skill set to have, because you would take what you've learned in the CCNA or whatever certification you go for, the CWNA, and you go, all right, this is how spanning tree works, or this is how 802.11 association works. That would be troubleshooting would be such a critical thing to have in any environment, because in an IT consulting role, if you work for like an MSP or a VAR, you're going to be thrown into an environment that you have no idea about. So you're going to have to figure out the lay of the land, because maybe whoever is there has no idea, or there's no network diagrams. So as long as you got a login, you should be able to figure out that network and go, all right, this is where this switch connects. These are the interfaces that go here. This is where the gateway lives. How many are we hitting MAC address limits on this switch? Are we hitting, are we dropping packets because queues are being filled? That kind of thing. So troubleshooting is going to be a big piece. And on top of that, another big thing that I think network engineers, a lot of network engineers are lacking, are soft skills. And so as you're talking to important people, you need to have the right soft skills and understand who you're talking to. And good morning, Netscape. Good to see you here. When you're working on an issue, we have to wear two hats. We need the technical hat, right? I'm deep in the trenches of command line interface. I'm troubleshooting, doing debugs. But then when somebody who is not technical comes to you and says, hey, what seems to be the problem, or they're breathing down your neck, you need to be able to take off that hat, put on a different hat, and translate what you can see technically into something that a non-technical person can understand. So by throwing out a lot of acronyms and telling them leave you alone, it's not a good look. And so with any environment, someone's always going to be like, hey, what's the problem? When will it be back up? What is the issue? You need to be able to use soft skills and be like, I'm still trying to figure out what the problem is. I'll get to a root cause. I need to identify where the problem is, but I do need some time. So if you could, I don't have an ETA just yet because I haven't found the problem, but you just got to set them at ease, right? And give them what your next steps would be and be able to explain things and not give them like, hey, port UDP 631 is blocked and that's why all the people can't print. And so like being able to keep your cool, as Netscape says, keep your cool and help others be cool. And also if somebody is also working on the issue with you, one of you should be a person to field all the questions, because it wouldn't make sense to have multiple people being bombarded with questions, and you'll quickly be thrown into a situation where you'll be being going down rabbit holes. They're like, what about this? What about that? Is it this issue? It's good to have at least one engineer who's really just figuring it out while somebody else can hop on the bridge or the war room call, whatever you want to call it. But being able to have the ability to learn, ask good questions, figuring it out, troubleshooting, soft skills, I would say focus on those 5 to start. And soft skills, you can work on that anywhere. It's just not a skill for network engineers. That's a skill for any role that you're going to be in. But troubleshooting will be key, because the books, the certifications only show you so much troubleshooting that you'll end up being in an environment where it doesn't align with what you saw in the book. And so that's why knowing fundamentals, knowing how things are supposed to work, and then trying to find where that sticks out, where it's not supposed to work, that would be good. And so that's just kind of like what I've seen from network engineers, and I think other network engineers can pick up on. And so I planned this on purpose, but I did come across a Reddit post where somebody put a post saying, hey, I have to put up Wi-Fi for an event and 1 million people are going to walk through. Now, it's probably a troll because the Reddit post is now removed. But it made me think, because I was reading the description, and I don't think this person did enough research into what is involved in providing Wi-Fi for a crap ton of people. And this would be a large public venue, obviously, or maybe a city event where 1 million people are going to be walking through, and maybe 1 million is just kind of an exaggeration. But there are whole design guides on doing Wi-Fi for a large public event like that. And it's not as simple as just putting up APs and crossing your fingers. There's a whole slew of configuration items, and this is maybe where enterprise grade comes in. Having a lot of different knobs and understanding what those knobs do to help provide Wi-Fi for 1 million people. And there were some good responses on that Reddit post, especially some saying, hey, talk to the vendor. There are actually companies who focus on doing something like this. And it just kind of seemed like a post where this guy needs to put something up, for this weekend. And so I hope that person's okay. And for 1 million people in an event, Wi-Fi is going to be underperforming. It's just so many people. There's going to be so much noise from the amount of devices that'll be there. And most likely the access points will be oversaturated with a number of users connecting to it. So you'll run into physics limitations, your physical RF limitations. And I thought that was interesting because is Reddit kind of a good platform to go to get help? And this is where, again, going back to enterprise grade, you should be submitting a ticket to somebody who probably has experienced this, maybe with stadiums or other large public venues. And so, yeah, for 1 million people, that's going to be challenging. Can the APs themselves support dozens of users, dozens and dozens of users on the AP? What kind of backhaul do you have? So even just 1 million people and saying I'm going to provide, if I can meet 1 meg per second for each person, you're going to exceed your backhaul, unless you've got multiple ISPs coming in. And so it's not just even Wi-Fi to consider for the people, the 1 million people that you've got to support, but you've also got to consider your DNS servers that are going to get hit, your DHCP servers that are going to get hit. Do you have a DHCP scope large enough for this many people? What is the least time going to be? So there's a lot to consider there. So I thought it was entertaining to see a post where someone said, "Hey, I need to put Wi-Fi up for 1 million people. What would you do?" Because I even have not done Wi-Fi for 1 million people. You got to talk to the folks who do stadiums and large city events. That's who you need to talk to. And so this is where I go into near the end of the live stream where I talk about what I've been working on and what I've learned. So what I've been working on, and this is the topic of, is it a Wi-Fi issue or not? Because I have one environment where a couple of users drop from Wi-Fi or cannot connect to Wi-Fi. And the vendor does pretty well with the logs that they collect. I'll just go ahead and say, this is a mist environment, and they have a section in the dashboard called client events. And so I'd be able to see when the client associated, did they pass 802.1x security? Did they disassociate? Did they roam to another AP? Did they have problems with DNS, DHCP? So there's a lot of client events logged in this dashboard. But when it comes to a user who says they can't connect, they get an error message on their iOS device saying can't connect to this network. There's a lot of APs on the same channels, reboot your router, that kind of thing. Kind of have to dig into it a little bit more. And in this scenario, the user had a timestamp for when the issue occurred. They just took a screenshot on their phone, and I could see the time for when they had the issue. But when I correlate that with the dashboard, there is no client event for that timestamp. There's a good 10-minute gap from when the user left, roamed away from an AP, and then when they joined a new AP, there's 10-minute gap there. And so support, I've been working with support on it for a week now, but they were saying there's no client events. And so this is where I start thinking, okay, so I was putting a lot of trust in the dashboard or the vendor, and now I need to look at ways to verify if the dashboard is wrong. So is this a Wi-Fi issue, or is this more of an infrastructure issue, a UI issue, or is it an issue on the device itself? So what I ended up doing is putting a YBot sensor. So YBot, they make these network sensors. They look like access points, but they do a lot of network tests. And one specific test I was using was called the Link Doctor. So Link Doctor will do a full association. It tests DHCP, DNS. Can it do DNS resolution? Can it go out to the internet? All of that. So I had a YBot sensor in the general vicinity of where this person is. And it can also do packet captures, over-the-air packet captures. And once in a while, the sensor does have the same symptom as the end user. And specifically, the log message from YBot says AP did not respond to authentication requests. And by authentication, it's the 802.11 authentication. And so I then went to go look at the PCAPs. On the YBot, I can say, hey, go to this time. Give me the PCAPs in that 5-minute interval. And I was specifically looking for an 8:30 a.m. PCAP. And luckily, I have the PCAP over the air. I go and look for the MAC address that was making the association. And I was able to see that, yes, the YBot sensor did a probe request for the SSID. And then the AP did a probe response saying, yeah, I got this SSID. Feel free to join. And so it went into the 802.11 authentication, but in the PCAP, I did not see a response from the AP. And so I was curious, like, okay, why would that occur? Is there noise in the area? Were there retries? What would cause that? And then why would it work when it initiated another? So essentially the test, it failed. I saw the YBot do an authentication, 802.11 authentication 3 times, and then it just couldn't connect. And then 10 minutes later, it tried the test again, and it worked just fine. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And this is where I'm in this middle ground now. Like, is it a bug on the AP? Because for that AP, I don't see that same issue in another environment. But the difference is that they're on different firmware versions. So I'm likely to maybe downgrade the firmware, but support says to upgrade. But support is giving me 2 bug fixes that I don't necessarily see as relating to the issue. And so I don't know, just kind of where I'm at. And Ian, thanks for joining. So you're adding also in your experience, a very good engineer can take a highly technical topic and explain it properly for those that are non-technical with simple and basic to understand concepts. That is absolutely true. And I think this is where blogging is very good, and also maybe doing videos, because if you're able to explain these topics properly to a point where people understand what you're actually trying to solve or trying to explain, then that's great. And that's why I also do videos, because I can write things out pretty well. But in video, I'm actually trying now to explain this issue off the top of my head, trying to remember things. Otherwise, I would have shown the PCAPs, but it just contains too much info about the client. So hopefully we can come to a resolution on that issue that I've seen. Maybe it is firmware, but one issue that resolved it on iOS, I had the user remove or reset network settings. And I got this tip from Ali from the Clear to Send Slack channel. And so far that has worked. Also, they were joined to a different SSID. So now we know that even the another SSID works just fine. That doesn't have the same security checks as the SSID with the problem. So I'm just trying to limit the amount of changes that have to be done and understand which change makes the positive outcome. So that's just kind of what I've been working on. I hope to test Wi-Fi 7 pretty soon. I'm trying to get a hold of another AP, maybe the AP47, and just have plans to, in the future, for upgrading APs and understanding how the clients interact with Wi-Fi 7. So just kind of working on that. And kind of had to go back and deploy a switch on the campus environment where they have these portals. I don't know if you've seen these portals. They had one in New York that it has a video. It's just like a portal, has a video, and it's like a video conference to another country. And so you're able to interact with people in a different location. So I had to provide a switch for that environment. And even configuring switches via CLI, I had to remember the CLI commands because it's a Cisco switch. But I had configured a 10 gig port with the VLANs that I needed. But by the time the switch went on site, it was actually connected to a 1 gig port, 1 gig SFP, which I did not configure that port for the right VLANs. So I needed someone to go on site, console into it, and put the right VLANs, add the VLANs all across the uplinks that I had required for. But just kind of stressing out in that environment on a Friday afternoon before everyone goes away for the weekend. That's a typical network engineering issue, isn't it? And so what I've learned this week is to have things planned out for what you need to do. So for me, I usually use Apple Notes a lot, and I'll put in, these are the I'll plan out what I need to do. So here's the end result. These are the changes I need to make. This is here's how I'll verify that. Or, this is the amount of equipment I need. Here's where they're going to go. Who's going to be in charge of, running the cable to this location, send pictures to verify the installation, things like that. So for me, it's about what I've learned is the preparation is key, and having time during the week set aside to just prepare for certain things, to prepare for the work that you're going to do is important, just because it helps set a better outcome, and also you catch what you may have missed when you didn't plan. And so there are situations where, many situations where I don't plan for it, but we do make the change and then we miss something, right? So especially like the switch I was just talking about, I configured the 10 gig port, but in my plans, I should have configured also the 1 gig port just in case they put they use the 1 gig SFP. So whatever you want to use for planning, I try to keep it as simple as possible. So I always just use notes. There are some applications out there like Jira where you can do a lot of planning for that, but sometimes it's a lot more work than required, especially for when maybe the project is pretty small, or maybe it's not even a project, it's just a task. So at least having somewhere you're writing down what needs to happen, who's going to do what time it needs to happen, some context as to why it needs to be done a certain time, that kind of thing. And how are we going to verify it? To me, verifying is always the good thing, especially on a Friday afternoon. I want to be able to configure something and verify that it works. So that way I don't get called today. And luckily I haven't had a call this morning, but I don't want to get called on the weekend when this doesn't work. But that's what I've learned this week. So I want to thank you guys for joining me here on this live stream. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day for 1 hour. So whether you just had this on while you're mowing the lawn or making breakfast, having coffee, I appreciate you. If you liked anything that you said here, go ahead and give me a like. Leave me a comment on what you don't like. I'm okay to negative comments. I take that as feedback and we'll adjust it for the next one. And I'm still thinking about changing the time away from Saturdays, because Saturdays are typically baseball days for my son. So hopefully that doesn't interfere in the near future. But hopefully looking to put this more on a weekday. But then my problem is I work during the morning on the weekday. So I don't know if my employer would enjoy that I do live streams during work hours, but who knows. And yeah, if you want to see more of these videos, go ahead and subscribe so you get the notification for when I put the next live out there as well. Some of the future lives that I will do, I plan to do a lab environment. I just need to make sure that the laptop I'm using doesn't lose internet when I connect to the lab, or I somehow remote into a computer that's connected to the lab. And so we'll go and set up either a firewall or do some switching labs, or maybe even some Wi-Fi labs. So, there's different topics that can come up, but I'll plan it out and figure out, which labs we're going to do and how I can best show it to you in a live environment, because it is tricky to move things around on the screen and hopefully have internet. But thank you again for joining me. You guys have a great weekend. I will see you on the next show version live stream. Thanks, guys.